Camera keeps moving around. What'd you say again? No, it's just the Google camera. It's moving around itself. Owl. It's an owl. OWL. Yeah, it feels like it's moving all over me. I'm gonna have to move my signs to. Yeah, I don't know if it's auto, if it'll follow me. I tried to figure that out with the IT, but they're gonna come and help us figure that out. So I did just want to warn you guys, that's why it's moving around so much. Sean here. Hi, I'm Dr. Sean Hochschild. I am honored to introduce Christo, who is going to defend his thesis. I met him in Indonesia. He has a lot of aspiration, and I do think he's going to be very successful in this. We have gone through quite a few things at RIT, but now he is in the Lamar Master's program. I'm very excited to see his growth, and I'm going to introduce him for his thesis defense. And additionally, the camera is having some technical issues. It is jumping all over the place. I know that it's new, IT is coming, so please be patient with us as it jumps around. Christo here. Has everybody already been admitted into the room before I get started? Has everybody already been accepted and entered into the room? Ah, the camera went back on Sean. He's moving. Let's see. Maybe it'll jump to the interpreters now. Can I get my slides up, please? Okay. Everybody good? I'm trying to get the camera's attention. Okay. Okay. You didn't introduce the committee, right? So I need to do that. Sean's coming back. Let's see how the camera works. LOL. Sean here. We have. Okay. Sean here. We did have two committee members in the room, Dr. Clark and Dr. Smith. are part of the committee working with us very closely. They are sitting in the back of the room. Now, you might be able to see them in their video feeds on their own Zoom. They have joined. I don't think the camera is going to jump to them, but now we're waiting on the camera to get rid of Sean. See if it'll make Christo bigger because it's not a ghost anymore. Okay. Good morning, Christo here. Thank you so much for your patience as we wait on IT to figure out the camera jumping madness. My name is Christo. My sign name is Christo because I'm from Indonesia. And I did just want to give a brief explanation. I wanted to thank the Bali Deaf who have been involved and have helped me so much with this study. I've got a lot to learn from them, and them sharing their experiences have meant so much to me. I'm hoping this study will give back to the Bali Deaf community. So the epistemology I'm going to explain for Bali people and their stories and what that represents today in my study. Thank you to my parents as well who are here watching me. Hi, Mom and Dad. Are we ready to get started? Next slide, please. Okay, so the background of the study, the research that I've been doing, I had to look through quite a bit, and there were three things that came up commonly: sociolinguistics, deaf identity, and Basindo. These were the three commonalities that continued to come up, and there was not anything else really. The second square is the location. It was in Kolak village in Bali. And then there was one other linguistic study that we did for Indonesian Sign. That was Jakarta and Bali, Yogyakarta and Makassar. And then Basindo, also, there were two things that came up in the study. In Palafree and Sean Hochschild, who is here, they already, come on in. They had research done prior to this about Indonesian Sign Language. Can you help us with the camera? You're with IT, right?
Yes, I'm so sorry for being late.
Yes, IT is here to help us with the camera.
What's going on with the camera?
The camera, we don't really know how to make it stay in one spot rather than jumping to all of the different people that it sees.
That's kind of how this one specifically works. I do have another one I can go get if that would be better, but it would be like a fixed position and we could move it back and forth.
What does everybody else think? Yeah, I think the other one would
Other
be
one?
better
Okay.
if it could be in a fixed position.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll be right back.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for your patience as we figure this out. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. So Basindo, how that came about, Palafree did some research. I think in the 1940s, 1930s, there was a school for the deaf that had already been established, but it was oral. They were not teaching Indonesian Sign of any kind. They already had their own communication system set up that they used. And Sean, Dr. Hochschild, he did research into that and his findings about the deaf community. And their socialization was that it happens outside of the classroom. Socialization was not during school because it was oral during school. And that's how deaf identity was developed. And so those influences were also language, politics, all the legal Western type influences. And those influences led to my research, which is the fourth square on this slide. There was no anthropological or cultural aspect really around Indonesia. There was not any epistemology that had been studied about deaf in Indonesia. And so that's the background of my research. Next slide, please. The problem statement, there were three things that came up. Two already have some research. And the other one, the epistemology, was lacking in research. There's nothing existing at this time. And so that's what I wanted to look into, was the epistemology of deaf Indonesians. I was wondering, is there anything? Is there not? That was my problem for this thesis. Next. So the purpose, really, there were three things. I wanted to know first about the deaf community in Bali. What were their stories and experiences, and how do they gain knowledge? And I knew that would be question number one. Question number two, I wanted to see US epistemology of deaf people and if Indonesia reflected that. And if there were any similarities, great. And if not, what were the differences? Third, in what ways do Indonesian people perceive their knowledge as a source of inspiration? What kind of role models do they have? And how do they live their life and navigate the world through that? Those were my purposes for research. Next slide. Okay. Are you guys able to see me okay? The camera's moving, but we're doing good. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. Next slide. Okay. So my study had some limitations and delimitations. The limitations were Bali only, Indonesia, of course, but I couldn't pick all of Indonesia. It's huge. So I studied Bali specifically. This is also very new. It's a preliminary study. So my study is going to be the first of its kind. Hopefully more will follow. And then the findings, the conclusions, everything that we have is not going to represent all of Indonesia. Like I said, it's only for the Bali area. And we did exclude hearing people. It didn't include them at all. Additionally, we didn't include deaf outside of Bali. Like Jakarta and other areas, we weren't able to use those. We're focusing again on Bali only. And then we were not using phenomenology. It's important to make sure that we know our study was qualitative and it's just general descriptive stories and experiences. We need to see on the surface what's happening first and what people are living. Next. Okay, the deaf history. I'm going to explain that first, and then we'll move more into Indonesia because they are all correlated. Linguistic identity was Paul Freeman. He had already done a study, and that led into the educational aspect that was already set for Indonesia, like I explained. They had set up a school in the local area for Indonesians. And that's where that one school, everything was there. It was a central hub for education. But sign language there was banned. It was oral only. So they weren't able to learn sign in school. They had to kind of hide that. What's wrong? What am I doing? Better? Better. Okay, great. Okay, so that one school, the central hub for education in Holland, it was oral only. They were not allowed to sign. That led on to Sean's research, Dr. Hochschild. And he thought, the Sindo does seem to be coming from there, just outside of the classroom during their social time. So that was the study in 2022. And then lastly, the deaf identity in Jakarta. And noticing that it was strongly influenced by the West. 3 Indonesians were learning from other countries, Hong Kong and other places that were influencing the language, and it was being spread. So my research comes after that, looking into the epistemology of deaf Indonesians. There were 4 theoretical frameworks: deafhood, deaf epistemology, deaf crit, and deaf identity. The first one, deafhood, I wanted to see the journey of deaf people understanding their deaf identity, that they are deaf. Next, deaf epistemology. Both of those studies that looked into deaf epistemology, how is that going to show culture, experiences? So collecting all of that, doing that research, getting deaf epistemology information from shared experiences of deaf people and deaf culture and what commonalities come up. Deaf crit is the systemic resistance to hegemony, the idea that hearing people, the deaf crit is going to show the resistance to a hearing system and a hearing world, that deaf people have their own way. That's what deaf crit is going to show. And then deaf identity has 6 stages. The first stage is confusion, and we'll show that through the research, moving into frustration, reflection, and identification, knowing that there is an other hearing and that I am deaf, and then trying to figure out, do I fit into that deaf identity or not? And then the last stage is pride, deaf pride, accepting that you are deaf, and that's it. Not thinking, hearing, deaf, accepting that deaf identity. So those are the theoretical foundations for my study. And I've talked a lot about everything leading up to my study. So deaf epistemology in Bali, we wanted to see, is that the same? Is the identity the same? Is the epistemology the same? Or are there different ways? Is the resistance within the system the same? So that's what led me to think, is everything happening in Bali common in other areas? That's what I wanted to study. That's where I started. So this is my diagram, my lit review of all of the different theories that lead into my study. I made a model of them. Hopefully you're able to see the words and it's not too small. But okay, first on the left side is deafhood. From deafhood emerges deaf culture. Deaf culture influences deaf epistemology, and that's how the research is based and how I looked through everything. It works both ways, from left in and right in to deaf epistemology. So everything that I was seeing, especially with sign language emerging, all brought back to deaf epistemology. And once we had an understanding of that, we had to figure out what that means for deaf identity. How do we make our own ideas? And then lastly, looking at the idea of disabled people and how we can resist that idea, how we learn to say, no, my perspective does not fit what you define as a disability. How can we be included in that area without feeling like an other? Because in the hearing world, they see deafness as a disability. And so how do we show that while it might be a disability, there is a language and a culture that goes along with it? And so that's where the critical disability group comes in. My methodology, I've said before, but it was general and qualitative, a lot more descriptive. It touched on a lot of different people's experiences and knowledge growing up. And I had different topics that I used. I used Max QDA to do a thematic analysis of all of the different qualitative stories that I was getting. I had to code them and see what commonalities emerged. Things that showed up over and over and over are what we used. So we have an appendix that we will help us within the technology to code everything, find everything that came up, and visualize all of the findings. That is going to lead our coding process, which we do have to do first in coding, is a cycle. The first cycle of coding is looking at the initial coding, and then the second step is building categories and separating everything into categories, which you can see in my image here. It narrows down as you move from left to right. Okay, IT is here. For the interview, the epistemology interviews, there were 5 participants in the beginning who were deaf themselves from Bali. They were born in Bali. They never left or had even flown to another country before. So I was able to see their experiences, interview them. And there wasn't enough. I needed to do additional interviews. We hadn't reached data saturation yet. We weren't able to narrow everything down to see all of the commonalities between them. So I had to do more interviews, 5 additional people, which brought us up to 10 participants. And with 10, we've met data saturation. 5 was not enough. Next, looking at pictures from their activities, from events that they went to, things that they did, like workshops, trainings. How do I connect all of that to my okay? Were you ready to go? Yes. Thank you. We're moving out the camera. That's just a second.
Run through this one.
Yeah, we're using Zoom.
Does this camera, the new one, have sound included?
That, I'm actually not sure that it works with Mac. Now that I'm looking at it. I don't see it popping up in here. Is there a, alright, I'm not super familiar with Macs. Is there
I think
a,
you have to disconnect this camera
This one?
first. Zoom won't allow to.
oh, it's just. What did it pull up? Let me plug this one back in, that way we're not interrupting you guys. Give me 1 second.
They will see me. I know it's jumping. Now that it's not split, thank you for your patience. I'll get started again. Okay, so the triangulation, what we did was we were trying to show the correlation between 3 things: the lit review, the participants' experiences, and the pictures or historical documents. I already explained a lot in the lit review, the theoretical framework. So the next part of that, next slide, please. I want to really emphasize and drill in these 3 things again. My first question was, how are their experiences narrated? Second, how does it compare to the US and Bali? What's the difference in the epistemologies? And lastly, deaf Indonesians, how is their knowledge a source of inspiration or guidance for navigating the world? Those were my 3 questions. So remember those leading into the results. My results from the coding, like I showed you everything that we found. In the initial coding, there were 17 different strength or pieces in the beginning that we had to figure out subcodes for, which became this list on the left. The left list is our initial coding. Once I was able to get all of those narratives and we saw commonalities coming up over and over and over, I'll explain more of what we saw and it'll be more of a visual aspect. The next part was the categories. The initial coding, we had 3 categories come from that, which ended with knowledge construction in deaf Balinese. How they build their knowledge. So this is how we worked down, and I will explain more of that. Next slide. Okay, so here's the visual, the initial coding. You can see those are the colors at the top. The subcodes are what follow underneath. And we had to get all of the basis ready, but where they came from were the color at the top. So access to language is obvious. First, we knew that there were a lot of barriers and frustrations to getting language access, but once language is accessed, becoming successful after that, but the strategies to get there is something that we talked about. Next is parental influence and control. It is very interesting. Parents are, we're waiting to see, IT is here, just so you guys know. He's trying to plug in a camera again.
I've got him bringing me another one as well. No, it's just issues.
Yeah, we're gonna hold for just a second.
I'm so sorry. Have him bringing me another one that does have sound. I'll be right back.
Thank you. There you go. Hey, okie dokie. Thank you guys again for your patience. Okay. Family or parental influence and control. There were 3 things that emerged from that as well. Family avoidance, parental encouragement, saying yes, 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 but they had a lot of continual encouragement, and then parental restriction. And the family would avoid as well during celebrations. They'd say, they would go to another room rather than being in the whole social gathering. So they would avoid their family. And I'll explain more about that next. Next is support systems and community. Everyone said that you have to be involved in community if you want to improve and develop your life, language, and access. You have to be part of the community, period. That came up over and over and over. Community, community, community. For example, learning from deaf role models came about. Someone they're able to look up to. But then how do you find those deaf role models? Well, that was from community, being around older deaf, learning from them. And I will have a lot of other things to explain about that link to parental control as well. Organizational involvement. Next, barriers and struggle. Feeling isolated within the family, which would lead to that family avoidance. Not being taught, lack of guidance, lack of mentors within the school and within the family, feeling like they didn't know how to do anything. So getting involved in the community is where they would get that information from. experiencing offense or offense, saying you can't. Like maybe a deaf person wants to have a certain job and they envision this life for themselves and they say, I want to do the same as you. And they would be told, no, you're not hearing, you can't do that. So then being discouraged by that, or you can't speak, which means you can't do that, would be experiencing offense. So they might feel very discouraged by all of that. And that came up often in the stories that I was told. Next is identity and selfhood. Asking someone, what does it mean to be deaf? Is that a positive thing or a negative thing? And so the framing or the lens was that it wasn't necessarily negative. You could shift that to a positive lens because there shouldn't be much of a difference. There's nothing wrong with being deaf. So you can see it from a positive perspective. So reframing deaf positivity, and then resistance to isolation and limiting beliefs. How do you develop that resistance? How does that come about? Which I'm going to explain next. And then self-development. Being involved in the community, you're able to maintain that education and learning of things that you have not lived yet. You can learn from the community and gather that information to continue working and developing yourself. Lastly, education and learning experiences. Being in an oral school, that's what everyone said, that they were taught to speak and they had no idea about language access. They felt lost. So forced oralism and education, and then peer teaching and mentorship. The community saying, oh, you're young and you're deaf. I've been there. I can mentor you. I can help you through this part of life. So that passing on of information, mentoring the younger deaf community, because I was there. You were like me. And so that is all of our initial codes. Next slide.
So now we're moving on to parental control. I'm going to let you read the quotes first, and then we'll move on to the rest of the slide. So what does this mean? This means the community, BDC. I use that word, you see the name here, that's a pseudonym. Their name isn't really Elda. Of course, I wanted to protect their identity. So I didn't want to use their real name. So this quote was interesting. The parents, throughout the 5 interviews, I saw that they couldn't negotiate with their parents. The parents would say, no, no, no. And they'd say, okay, fine. But then they'd kind of go around that. They don't want problems with their parents. You know, their parents are important to them. They want to maintain that relationship with their parents and respect their parents. So all the participants said that their parents weren't wrong. There was nothing wrong with them. They would say, I know that my parents are doing this out of love, but it's also out of fear. So this quote shows that it's a double-edged sword, that feeling of love and also fear. It's bad. One way is bad, but the other way is also bad. Like, for example, this negotiation with the parents. They would tell my parents, hey, I want to get involved with the community, but the parents would say no. But then they would show these 3 aspects. You see at the top, family avoidance and etc. As the parents would become older and you pass away, how would I survive if you've passed away? That was a common theme that came up. As your parents become older, what are you gonna do? What am I gonna do? Do I stay at home? I'm not happy here at home. So how do I develop that knowledge of the word? And so you might tell your parents, well, that's from the community. And so all of the stories said, I told my parents, hey, you know, I want to be involved in this community. And they would say no. And so then I would find another older adult in the community in the BDC and say, hey, can you come with me and talk to my parents and tell them about the community? And they would say, sure, of course. And so this older deaf person has already experienced this. Of course, I was 16 or 17 at the time. And these older adults were like in their 20s. And so they would come with me to talk to my parents, and they would say, oh, okay, well, you're deaf as well, you have a job, you are involved in the community, and it would help my parents' facial expressions, you could even see them change because they could see, oh, deaf people can have jobs. And they would feel that sense of relief. And so they would say, yes, Christo, you can go to the community, you can join the community, but you have to have somebody with you. Of course, I was in my teens, so they wanted somebody with me, sort of like a chaperone, to make sure that I was in the community and I was okay. And then eventually they let me to go on my own. They didn't want people to bully me or to feel discouraged, and so they were just protecting me because I was their child. But you know, it was good and bad at the same time. So there was that encouragement, but there was still limitations. So it was like, yes, but. Yes, there's permission, but we have these rules related to it. So this is related to parental control and influence. Now on to structural barriers related to language and learning. You can see the quote here. IT is here again, so we are going to have to hold again. My apologies. Will there be sounds in this camera?
Yes, there's a mic. Yeah.
Great. We would like to test that the interpreter's voice can be heard. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
So that fixes it.
Yeah, it seems like it's okay. Okay, so I need to sort of shift my signing space, maybe turn more towards the camera. Interpreters. Yeah, let me know if you guys can't see me. Okay, where was I again?
Thank you, IT.
No problem.
Okay, where were we? So if you've read the quote, there are barriers. One of the quotes said, there were barriers, but I didn't want to have that experience. Because if I have these experiences, if I have these barriers, then my thinking ability will decline. I'll have that stress because I don't know what's happening. I have no mental stimulation. I need information. Otherwise, I'll feel lost. And so those barriers to communication, the blocks to language, that leads to frustration. And so that's why they feel isolated. They feel rejected. They want to be involved in the community. They want to have that community relationship. So we'll move on to the next slide. Well, next slide. Hello? Next slide. Okay, thank you. So now we're talking about being involved in the community. Start building that community relationship. Start developing your identity, looking up to your role models within the community, which leads to improved self-esteem. You see, oh, I have these different groups, and you can say, okay, well, here's hearing and here's deaf. And of course, I still care about my parents. I love my parents. But I have to say, I'm going to join the deaf community. And so when you join the deaf community, they give you permission, but then you come back home, you see them again. You have to tell them, you have to text them. For example, you say, okay, I'm leaving to go out to a community event, and they'll say, okay, great, what time are you coming home? But if I go past curfew, my parents might say, what's up? So I have to go home at the time that we've discussed. It's conditional. Like I said, there's permission, but it's conditional permission. So maybe this person, you'll see their name again, Ade, this is their sign name. That's a role model that I look up to. That person taught all the deaf community. All of the participants had the same message. They all said they looked up to Kak Ade. They learned everything. They learned how to navigate school. That means university, how they navigated university, how they dealt with teachers, how they approached their parents, negotiated with their parents, how they dealt with the wider hearing world. And so that taught them how to become part of the community without being upset, without anger, to be humble. That's the humble way to join the community. And all 5 of my participants mentioned Ade. So you'll see my theme. I've seen, I have this theme, and then there are 3 sub themes. So there's resistance, refuge, and recognition of the self. And so that theme is, how do you build knowledge? And that's all of those themes related to knowledge construction. Wait, go back. Okay. So the 3 sub-themes led to my research question. Resistance does support research question 1. US, the deaf community is resistant, and the same thing as Bali. They are resistant as well. There's no difference. They negotiate with their families, and there's no difference really between the 2. That means the theoretical foundation is supported. All my research, all the data collection supported research question 1. Refuge is partially supportive of research question 2. There are 2 additional deaf identities that need more research. The next part of my discussion will talk about that some more. The third, recognition, does lead to improved self-esteem. It feels like I've got role models that I can look up to, and both of the communities have that. There's no difference between the US and Bali. And the next part of my discussion will talk about that as well. Excuse me, these are all Indonesian words. I used Max QDA, and they have technology that's like a word cloud. So all 5 of the participants, you could see which words show up again and again and again in their stories. For example, obviously, Bahasa shows up often. That means spoken Indonesian. So they talked about language over and over and over again. Ade, that person, their name is still there because people talked about him over and over and over again. Tuli, which means deaf. They mention deaf. They emphasize that identity. School, family. Hilunggara means family. Dengar means hearing. Learning, I don't know if you could see this word, it's in very light blue, but it means signing. Isyarat. That means signing. Guru means teacher. There's communication. School again, and these were the words that appeared over and over again in the participants' interviews. These are some of my historical documents. There are pictures related to the stories. These are celebrations and parades for International Sign Language Day. And so that's hosted in part with the government. These are individuals from the government. They invited members of the Indonesian government to come for that visibility. We were able to show that we were here and that we can work with the government. And so that's something that's done every year. The young people are involved. We talk to schools. We have this parade for International Day of Sign Languages. And there are workshops and things of that nature, which you'll see on the next slide. This is a workshop showing how to make crafts. And on the right is a workshop teaching modeling, explaining, Bali, it's very popular to have modeling pageants. And so they want to teach young people how to develop their modeling skills. And so there's a whole workshop dedicated to modeling. Next slide, please. So now this is my discussion. So you can easily recognize what the Balinesian epistemology and US epistemology looks like. Again, we have the community. And that's very similar. We have deaf-hearing dichotomy. And that's a similar theme that comes up in both countries. Organizational spaces. Where are organizations within the deaf community? Modality, of course, they're both the same. There's sign languages, there's no speaking. Identity formation, it's the same, and that's through community. However, you'll see the yellow themes, those are different. Identity and whether you deserve your identity means that, for example, I'm involved in the deaf community and I'm recognized as having that identity. I'm deaf, they're hearing, and that's it. But in Bali, there's a different thing. There's deaf and hearing. Okay, that's fine. So what? You could say, yes, I'm deaf, that's fine. But do I deserve this deaf identity? Maybe not yet. They might feel disconnected. They might feel like I'm not really deaf. But I mean, yes, I'm deaf, but they don't feel that deaf pride yet because they're still learning deaf pride. They're still learning. You can honor the community, you can be proud, but you may not have your own pride yet. You might say, well, I'm proud of this community, but I don't deserve to be part of it yet because your identity is still growing. And as you learn, your identity will shift and you will feel like you deserve it. Deaf understanding. Here in the US, it'll say, oh, you're hearing and you're deaf. That's it. Those are the two categories. But in Bali, it's different. Okay, you're deaf and you're hearing. No, we're going to focus on access and what you can't access. You have a language. I have a language. Yeah. But what is the modality? That's the difference. It feels biologically different. Oh, I can't hear. You can use your hearing. Oh, I use vision. You don't use your vision to access language. There's nothing wrong with it. I respect you. That's okay. Deaf and hearing, that dichotomy is not quite the same. It's more like, oh, our biology is different. That's it. So do you feel deaf and you feel good in your deaf identity? Is the visibility? There's no visible difference between being deaf and hearing. You look the same. So if you couldn't see words, would that mean you just can't see? Like maybe you had a car accident, but of course deaf can have car accidents too. So can hearing people. It's the same thing because we both have eyes and we both can see. And it's not a feeling of, oh, I'm better at this than you are. I'm better than this than you are. There's no difference in how you access language and visible. That's the only difference is the biology. Can you all see this graph? Okay, it's pretty small. I'm going to kind of give you an overview. These are the results for my research questions. You see the 3 columns and it says R1, R2, and R3. The circles underneath connect to those questions. So the ones on the left are deaf crit, which is resistance to the system. The system says that I can't do this, I'm deaf, blah, 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 but I have the deaf way. And there's linguistic access. And we might say, hey, give me sign language, give me written language, give me something. That's the resistance to the system, to that hearing system. And resistance to parental control, to the family, that negotiation with your family, that's considered related to resistance. Those systemic barriers are related to resistance. And so this is my research question number 1. How do deaf people develop knowledge, and how do they use that to resist the system? How do they say, no, I'm deaf and I prefer it this way? Now, research question number 1 does involve resistance, but that's related to the community. And that shows a question of deaf epistemology. Is it the same or is it different? There are deaf epistemology that's grounded in culture. But again, do you deserve that identity? And that's different. This circle shows the biological differences. Whether that biology becomes your identity or not, again, do I deserve this? The interpreter is asking Christo to turn a little sideways. So I have this biological difference. And how does that relate to building my identity and building my relationship within the community? For research question number 3 is deaf pride. Again, do I deserve that deaf identity? And when I do, yes, I become proud of being deaf. I feel good about being deaf. And so again, this is Bali. So it is a contextualized, and again, it depends on the context. This is Balinesian epistemological knowledge, and it's all related to deafhood, which is the lifelong process of the sense of being deaf. Now, this is the integrated theoretical model of contextualized deaf Balinese epistemology. So I can say, yes, that happens, but I don't accept it because of the Balinesian philosophy of life. And that is Trihita Karana. And that means the philosophy, the embodiment of practices, the spiritual aspect, and then relationship to the community, the national culture. Do you feel like you have a balance of all of those? Yes, and then you'll feel pride. But again, somebody might be lacking the community and they might feel like, well, I'm still learning about the community and I don't deserve that deaf identity. If you feel good in yourself, that means you are ready to join the larger circles in this graph. And so this is my theoretical model. We are again explaining the model so that the Indonesian interpreters can see Christo. Okay. Next. In conclusion, in closing, the deaf Balinesian epistemology is contextual, meaning that there are similarities between US and Balinesian epistemology, but of course we have the context, the history, and the politics related to Balinesian identity. And that's where they're different. Well, not really different, but contextually dependent. We both have role models. And so those are the same, and that's it. That's the end of my presentation. John here, man, I'm so tall, I have to sit down to be in the camera. Thank you so much, Christo, for that fabulous presentation. I'm sure we would all agree. And now it is time for questions from the audience. So does anybody in the room have any questions? Does anybody in Zoom, maybe Christo's Indonesian friends, does anybody have any questions? One here.
Let me take the slides down. Okay, that's better.
Okay, Sean here, I'll be copy signing for audience members who have questions. Okay, so. When you decided to interview people, you said you had 10. Okay, yeah, I started with 5. So how did you determine whether an interviewee fit with you, your criteria? What criteria did you have when you selected your interviewees? And if so, how did you pick those interviewees?
Okay, Christo here. Got it. So what criteria did I use? I did explain that before, but they had to be born in Bali. They had to have stayed in Bali and never even flown out of the country. They haven't been to the US or anything, only ever stayed in Bali in Indonesia. And they must be Balinese culturally. They can't have moved from another city, and that they were deaf. And deaf of hearing parents, not deaf of deaf. Deaf of hearing. Those are my criteria.
Okay, Sydney here again. So when you interviewed people, were there ever any times when you felt like somebody wasn't a good fit and you excluded them for your interview, or did you feel like they were all a good fit?
Okay, so I had to get the person first to say, hey, will you be a part of my study? And I advertised, and if I couldn't find anybody, I would say, hey, can you go let some other people know? And can you let other people know? I did snowballing, so trying to get people by getting people. It was very purposeful. And so I had to make sure that they fit the criteria for my study. And if they did, then I said, okay, great, I'll interview you. And then it really wasn't hard to get the participants. Maybe because I'm Indonesian and I know them and work with them, it wasn't as hard for me, but.
Okay, any other questions from the audience? Yes. This is Andrew speaking. So here in America, compared to US, we have supported Indonesian people. But do you think it would benefit Indonesians to come to America and study and research and have some support here?
Let's see if we can get that box off the screen. Okay, that's fine. Okay, we're good. To answer your question. We have the question again, because the box was blocking it. So I was asked about staying in Indonesia to do more research. Will I be doing that, or do you think Indonesian people should come here and learn from being in America? What kind of research should we be doing, and what is my research support? Okay, so my answer to that question. This is my personal opinion, my decision. If Indonesian people on the Zoom, I love you. If you don't agree, that is okay. But I am deciding to stay here in the US following this research because I want to support anybody who wants to come here. I know there are so many in the US that have access to education and learning. It's a supportive environment for deaf people. So I am going to encourage Indonesians to come here if they want to learn, maybe Lamar, or if you need something, a scholarship, I would be able to help you with that. Because I'm still a student here, so hopefully you guys will come and join me.
You can ask Surya the same question.
You can ask Surya the same question. He studied at RIT. And he's also in America. So the US has been very supportive of me and will be very supportive of you. I love you very much.
Okay, anybody else in the room? Any questions from the room? Anybody in Indonesia? Any Tuli in Indonesia want to ask any questions in the chat? Here. Yeah, Christo's parents are clapping right now. You can sign or type in the chat box if you have questions. Nobody? Sean here. Okay, we're going to wait. Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity and to be here. And I want to ask you about epistemology. So the deaf community here in Bali, we have basic challenges in the community. And you just explained that it's contextual. We have hearing culture and deaf culture here, and they are different. So do we have a solution to that? I understand you explained a little bit about the epistemology and that we do have these two separate groups, but has there been a resolution to how they can merge the perspectives of each other, how we can work together? Maybe the word being more inclusive, that word, I respect hearing culture, yes, and we can respect deaf culture at the same time, but how can these two communities become one? Meaning that we have Indonesian feelings. So from your perspective, from the results, do you have any new ideas for how the two communities can sort of become one and become one Indonesia?
Thank you. This is the sign name for the person who asked the question. My research, personally, and my results and my conclusion said that deaf Balinese compromise and support each other rather than severely challenging people. And they're not very direct. They are more indirect. Whenever they are educating people, they do it in a nice way, explaining to the hearing community and to the government even, teaching them and educating them. If they don't understand, they do get frustrated, but they will give up. They give up very easily. They're not going to be confrontational. They're not going to try again. They'll just leave it. And so that's what happens in Bali. And around Indonesia, the culture is different, of course. So the policies in Indonesia and the theoretical framework, it should work together and fight together, even though there are different cultures, because the philosophies will impact the deaf community. And if we stay as one, in Sean's research and Dr. Hochschildt's research, he focused more on policy, language policy, and it showed that we must have one language, right? Before in Indonesia, there were several languages nationally, but the government decided on one language because they value that within the country. And then the Indonesian government said, you have to use this one system, but it didn't apply to sign language because they were thinking, oh, how can these deaf kids develop their Indonesian identities? So they're still trying to figure that out. And they realized that a signed system of language would be great and it would help them. But it was an error because it wasn't the language that they already had naturally. So the system that was picked for the entire country did not fit the deaf community. So it impacted all of Indonesia, especially within the rural areas. They had their own languages out in the rural communities. There wasn't one nationalized language. So now they are trying to preserve those languages and still respect minorities without excluding the languages of the minority communities in Indonesia. So that is impacting the deaf community right now as well, because there are so many different languages. So that's the philosophy within Indonesia.
Okay, we do have a question here in the chat box.
Okay. If possible, how are you going to collaborate from the US with Indonesia to do research together? Can we make that happen? And my answer is, of course, absolutely. I would love to have a partnership. There is a system that we could work out. It's just important to have university support. So if we have university here and university there that could work together and do research, that would be great. We could process through that. But we do have to have sponsor universities on both sides. Or it would be nice if you could get a scholarship of some sort that would focus on a study that you could do in Indonesia and be supported by Lamar. That way you don't have to fly here. You could do your research there. That would work too. But yes, absolutely. Okay. Okay, okay. An agency or an organization that is supportive of research for Indonesian Sign Language, specifically with funding. We have older deaf and hearing people who value sign language. So what do we do? Okay. Okay, I understand the question better. You do typically have to get a grant for research. The United States has grants. There are international grants that you can look into, but they're very strict and they're very competitive. So that means you really do have to write a very good proposal for the grant. It has to look really good for you to get it. So you have to work all over again if you don't get a grant approved to try again.
Hey. Hello, my name is Akas. I'm from Indonesia and I want to learn more about your experiences as you've begun research in deaf epistemology in Bali. And these important challenges that you have to face in the research project. And how in this research do you give credit to the deaf Balinesian community?
So some challenges that I faced were, yes, obviously translation. It took up so much time because my interviews were conducted in Indonesian languages. And there's not a national sign language. So then I had to change it into Indonesian, to change it into English. And so my tip would be to read a lot of Indonesian language, find the codes within that language, and then translate to English. That saved a lot of my time. I was very lucky that I started out that way rather than changing it all to English first. So I read everything, did the coding within the Indonesian language, and then I was able to put it into English. But it was very challenging, but it did work. It saved my time doing it that way. But then also the cultures are very different. So having to have an insider's perspective on Indonesian culture is important too. And then lastly, how do I give back to the community with this? Well, deaf epistemology in Indonesia, there's been no study on that. So my epistemology for my thesis, now I can give my entire study back to the community for Indonesian people and Bali people to use for research, for advocacy to the government. It will only be in Bali for now because that's where my study focused. But I'm hoping my thesis will inspire people in Indonesia to want to do more epistemology studies of the deaf there, because I can't do this alone, of course. I'm gonna need the community all over Indonesia because it's huge. It would take several years and so many different studies to do every culture and every language within Indonesia. So I need deaf Indonesians to get involved in epistemology studies because it is a very rich place. Anything else? I think that's it.
Okay, another question. Did you talk about crab theory in these Polynesian interviews? Okay.
It's fascinating, honestly, within my research, the interviews that I did, the first 5, I said, if you saw somebody being successful, what would you do? And they would say, oh, good for them. And I said, okay, what does that mean? You say good. So I was trying to encourage them to give me a little bit more, but they would say, oh, that's good. We share in that together. And so I don't know if that was a cultural perspective. Trahita Kana, maybe that's part of the Bali philosophy, because they do believe in their God and in their community and their culture. So within the community, they feel that they can encourage and help each other, support each other to succeed, whether they're deaf or hearing. But I did mention in the interviews as well, trying to teach and explain what to do with young people. And they would say, oh, is that good? Is that something that you would encourage? Would you honor that decision? And Bali didn't know if they should compromise with that or not. They would just leave it if that's what somebody's decision was to exclude a young deaf person. Question.
Okay, another question from the chat box. I am Ari. I want to ask about different groups within the deaf community who maybe companies support the deaf community in Indonesia.
You're talking about work for graphic design? For here in the US, it's hard to get a job because you have to have a visa. So if you can convince your company to work with someone in the US or convince a US company that you have really good skills, that you're amazing at graphic design, then they might be able to give you a job. There are some that do support the deaf community here, especially those in college. Colleges and universities are very supportive of deaf people coming to learn graphic design. So you could come here to learn. They have interpreters if you wanted to do a program of study here. And I know it's different in Indonesia. It is very much of a struggle with access and interpreters because there aren't any. Having to pay out of your own pocket, I understand that it's very hard. The US is different. That's why I chose to study here, because I was able to get a scholarship and I have access for interpreters. So you might be able to fight to come here.
Okay, the last 2 questions from the chat. Why did you pick Bali for your study? Do you feel that there's a strong international influence there?
So it's why I picked Bali, right? I wanted to read the question. Okay. Absolutely. I do agree with what you said. I picked Bali because I was just very curious about it. Bali does have many international travelers. So does that mean that they influence the culture? Does it change things? I was curious about that. So that is one of the reasons I picked it. But when I was interviewing them, it was very different than what I expected. There were so many people who travel there internationally, but the Bali community is very resistant to them because they don't follow all of the rules of what is their culture. So they think, oh, you native or you international travelers should come and respect our culture. You're making everything about you and wreaking havoc on our lives. And so Bali needs to stay the way that Bali is. So 2 things that I found were changing their behaviors and ways of thinking based on international influence, yes or no? And then how do you, and I've already connected with these people before. So being within the deaf community and talking to them, I already felt very connected myself. So I thought because of those connections and the international influence, I was interested in studying them.
Okay, I wonder if we could replicate your research and apply it more to general Indonesian epistemology or go even deeper into Indonesian epistemology.
Please do. Yes, because like I just said, Indonesia is huge. So if you're able to replicate my study and do it for other places, I will send you everything you need. And if we could include cities piece by piece by piece until we get all of Indonesia. I would love to read your research if you did something on epistemology in another area. We could teach each other, learn from each other, and see how they all correlate and apply and work together. It's like a puzzle piece. We could build each piece until we get a big picture of Indonesia. Please do. I would love that.
Plus, how do you encourage Indonesian hearing parents to expose their deaf children to sign language?
So parents in Indonesia know what's best for their kids, of course. But the problem is parents don't know how to deal with deaf children specifically. So that's why they send it to school. And they ask the school, what do I do with my deaf kids? And they follow whatever they're told. So they might ask a doctor, what do I do? And then they follow whatever they're told. So how do we make an impact? Is the deaf adults that are already there that feel inspired and have all of that experience should go and meet with these parents and say, hi, I'm here. I know you're a parent of a deaf child. They need to see, oh, you have a disability. Me too. And telling them what that looks like and what their lived experiences are so that they can know what to do. So meeting with the parents and say, oh, you studied in the US, Christo? How did you do that? Well, I started with sign language. And so influencing them that way by showing lived experiences, making sign language valuable so they can see how it's worked in other people's lives and that they'll be okay if they sign and that they're not alone. Like I just explained in Bali, all 5 of those interview participants said that they had to deal with negotiating with their parents. And when the negotiation didn't work out, they went with a deaf mentor into the community because they weren't allowed to go on their own. And then they started to accept it more and more. So it's really important to have deaf role models.
David, did you have a question? We could spotlight you. You guys see me? Hey, you did a fantastic job. I really enjoyed your presentation. I saw a slide where you mentioned language wasn't accessible, and there were 2 quotes, strategies. Let's see. I took a screenshot of the slide.
Okay.
Their ability, well, let me think how to ask this. They described their thought process and their ability. Well, they had a lack of language access, so they thought with that lack of knowledge, that would be a barrier to like in family settings. It was really interesting to talk about how that lack of knowledge would impact one's thinking process, like if we talk about dinner table syndrome, where the children are excluded from family conversations, from holidays, from events. And so there's a lack of incidental learning, which would become the foundation of language. And so we need to, are they prioritizing communication strategies or language access? Or do you think there's like an integrated model, a framework of all of these language access strategies?
Okay, so for communication strategies and language access, first, it's the lack of language access. So we have to ask, how are you getting that knowledge if you don't have any access to language? That's a huge barrier. And so we would say that you can use different ways, but how do we know? How do we realize that they understand or not? And there's 3 things, 3 ways that are different that I noticed. First is teacher's explanation, whether they're signing or speaking. If they're speaking the whole time, it's like, I don't know, but getting access to written word, that could help, but they can't read. So then at school, it's like, okay, we give them written notes, but then they're going to ball that up, put it in their pocket, go home and not be able to use it. They'll have to find a friend who knows the written word. Hey, can you sign this to me? And then they'll be like, oh, okay, I get it. Now they're going back to school and they're able to actually learn and improve from friends' feedback. Isn't that fascinating how they build that knowledge? They just get whatever they can from school, go home and get help. And so they have to get assistance through written language, through gestures, through sign language. They have to figure it out.
Sometimes they'll say things, like, hey, I'm gonna use VRI, sort of like VRI. So they'll call up a hearing friend and say, hey, what's being said? What's going on? Because in Indonesia, there's no access services for video relay interpreters where you could use your phone. You can only have a friend who uses the phone with you, who listens and then signs what the hearing person is saying. Which, how do they know to do that? I don't know. We just do. We just know how to do that as deaf people. And that's just something that's ingrained in us. And that's how you manage language access when you want to know what's happening. And it's the same with school or family. Like I said, if you're in school and you don't know what's going on, you can go an adult and say, hey, can you explain this to me again? You can ask somebody else, or you can ask somebody else in the community. Can you teach me what's happening at school? Like, what does this mean? And then they'll sign it to you, their explanation. And both of those things are the same.
And it's not full information, David says.
Correct.
There's a lot of gaps within that.
Yeah, it's not complete information, exactly.
Wow.
And the third strategy is very interesting. It might be the same here in the US. I do have a feeling, but I'd have to ask some other people if they had the same experiences. Like at Texas School for the Deaf, TSD. I have asked some of the students and they said, I asked them, well, what do you do if you don't understand what a word means? And they say, well, I use a picture. And I said, well, what do you mean you use a picture? You know, like if somebody gives me a word and I don't know what it means, I'll Google it. But instead of looking at the definition in written English, I look for pictures. And then it helps me to know what I'm looking at, what the word means.
Mhm.
Like academic college words, what if they don't have pictures? And they'd say, well, I'll use pictures and maybe combine them until I figure out exactly what it means.
Great, thank you so much. I could talk a lot about this, you know that, so I'll keep it short. Thank you.
Oh,
Good
I
job.
know, I know.
Good job.
Okay, thank you. Question and answer time is done. Now I'm going to ask the audience and the interpreters to please leave. Because the committee now has to meet. So thank you, everybody. We will have a waiting room. Maybe you can explain the reasons why we're asking people to do this. Yes, his master's committee needs to ask Christo questions, and it's going to be a private conversation between the committee members and Christo about his work and his research. Yes, thank you.
Okay, welcome back. Hello, hello, hello. Hopefully the interpreters can still hear. Oh, wow. Showed up late. So many more people here now.
Okay, Sean here. Christo. Thank you very much. You have passed
Thank
your
you so
master's
much.
thesis.
Awesome.
Oh, here's your parents.
Hi. Oh, they're frozen. Oh, hello. I did it. Yes, 2 thumbs up.
How do you feel now that you're done?
Oh, happy and not enough. It's not enough. I'm so happy, but it's not enough. You know, I do have to go on to my PhD, but even that's not gonna feel like enough. We're always gonna need more research.
Well, you love learning, so it's
Yeah.
okay.
We need a lot more people to get involved. There's a deep dive that we need to do into the rest of Indonesia. Cause we haven't even gotten to a little bit underneath the sea.
Yeah, he loves learning. He's gonna be a perpetual student.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're already getting into the PhD program, right?
Yes.
Yes, so now Christo is already gonna be entering our PhD program. He will be starting his classes in January. Woo-hoo, fantastic.
Okay.
If everybody wants to open their cameras, we're gonna switch it to a gallery so that we can take a picture of everybody on the screen. Go ahead and everybody turn your cameras on.
What, 83 people. 83, you see that? 83 participants? Wow.
I know. If. Okay, we're gonna do a screenshot, picture, 1, 2, 3.
Page. All right, next page. He's on this. Got it. All done.
Okay, thank you, everybody, for your time. Thank you for coming and watching Cristo and supporting as he defended his thesis. You did a great job, Cristo. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye, love you all. See you later.